This video is a companion to the recently published Firearms Explained. It will go into greater detail explaining the other side of the weapon armor equation. It will also show a few examples of common armor choices, as well as providing advice on what you might want to pick for protecting your pawns. The armor system is composed of several key components that I will briefly explain before we get to the specific armor options. The first is layer. Layer represents the order in which armor will be calculated and tested to see if a hit penetrates. Outer layer is calculated first, followed by the middle layer, followed by the skin layer. There is one final layer under the skin layer that's provided by implant armor. These armor implants are part of the royalty DLC. If a pawn is hit in the torso, and the outer layer covers the torso, then this will serve as the first line of defense in the armor system. If the hit penetrates this layer, it will then have to check again against the middle layer. If it manages to penetrate the middle layer, then it will check again with the skin layer. Just as a clarifying point, if a piece of armor takes up 2 layers, it will still only protect as a single layer. It just stops you from wearing other armor that also takes up that layer. The cover section represents which parts of the body the armor or clothing is protecting. When an enemy hits you, a location is rolled to determine which part of the pawn will be targeted. If the hit lands on the torso, and your armor covers the torso, then we'll have a chance to negate or reduce that hit. The head, neck, and torso are the most critical spots to protect. If a pawn loses a leg, they're going to survive. If they lose their head, they're going to have a real bad time. Now we get to the most important part of the armor system. That is, the protective value itself. It is a bit complicated, but bear with me and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Whether or not a pawn is hit is initially determined by the accuracy of the shooter and other environmental factors like weather and cover. When a shot does hit, a location is then randomly determined. For example, let's say it's determined that a pawn is hit in the torso. It will then first perform a check against the armor value of the outer layer if it covers the torso. The armor value of each layer is reduced by the armor penetration of the weapon. Sharp damage type checks against sharp armor, blunt against blunt armor, and fire checks against heat armor. A number from 0 to 100 is then generated. We'll call this number N. N is then compared against the new modified armor value. For example, if you were hitting a target with 100% armor protection with a charge rifle, since charge rifles have 35% armor penetration, the new modified armor value would be 65%. If N is greater than 65, it will continue unmitigated and be checked against the next layer. If N is more than half, or in our case here, 33 or higher, but less than 65, it will deal half damage and be converted to blunt. If N is less than half, or 33 in our example, it will deal no damage. This continues on until the damage is mitigated, or it has bypassed all layers of armor on the target, causing damage to the target location. If the damage is mitigated to half by the first layer, and then mitigated again to half by the second layer, then you will only receive a quarter of the damage of the attack. Keep in mind that if damage is mitigated to half by the first layer, it won't convert to blunt until all layers are calculated, meaning that even though at the end it will turn to blunt, for the sake of the calculations it will remain as sharp damage. So if your duster reduces the damage to half and converts to blunt, that doesn't mean that your flak vest will be rolling using blunt armor protection. It will continue to use the sharp armor protection until all layers are calculated. Until now, I've barely mentioned heat protection, but this comes into effect when your pawn is caught on fire. Every tick of fire damage has a chance of being reduced or negated in the same manner as sharp and blunt damage. One last fun note about armor. If your armor is above 100% after armor penetration, then it will always reduce damage either to half or to 0, since N can never be over 100. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. If you do have any questions about it, feel free to leave it in the comments. Before we get to the particular pieces of armor, let's address the helmet situation. We can avoid going into too much detail by establishing a rule of thumb for helmets. Use the highest tech helmet that you have access to. If you have flak helmets, use flak helmets. Once you unlock Recon armor, use Recon helmets. And the same is true for Marine helmets and Cataphract helmets. The only exception to this rule of thumb is in the very early game when you have to decide between simple helmets and some other low-tech options. I personally prefer crafting broad wraps out of Devil Strand or Hyperweave. The broad wrap has more locations covered than any other helmet, and with high quality material like Devil Strand, it comes with a very respectable sharp protection. If you don't have Devil Strand or Hyperweave, just make simple helmets out of steel or plasteel. It is generally best to make sure all of your pawns are equipped with the best helmet available before moving on to upgrading to the next tier of torso armor. The first of the torso armor that we will discuss is plate armor. Many players skip plate armor due to the heavy movement speed penalty and low end protection, but it may be time to reconsider that decision. In terms of its cover spots and protection, A set of normal quality plasteel plate armor is almost identical to a set of poor quality marine armor, with only a larger penalty of 0.16 movement speed and only 1.6% less sharp protection. I personally wouldn't bother with plate armor unless it's made of plasteel and at least normal quality. Just like the higher tier armors, plate armor takes up both the outer layer and the middle layer. This means that you cannot pair it with a flak vest or duster. In terms of actual damage protection, the plasteel plate armor is an acceptable choice for the early game. This is especially the case when you consider how easy it is to craft compared to marine armor or trying to get a high quality flak vest. If you do craft or find a high quality flak vest for your melee pawn, it still may be better to go that route, given that the higher quality flak vest will provide better torso and neck protection, and these are critical places to protect. Since the movement speed penalty can be quite punishing on pawns both in and out of combat, I tend to stick to having only 1 or 2 melee pawns in plasteel plate armor, and that has to be weighed against their role outside of combat. It is always an option just to unequip the armor outside of combat and put it back on when they're ready to fight, but then again, you don't have to go through this trouble if you're using a flak vest and duster combo. That brings us next to flak armor. When it comes to flak armor, skip the pants and the jacket. The flak vest, on the other hand, is a key piece in early and middle game protection. The flak vest only takes up the middle layer, meaning it can be paired with any other outer layer protection. The standard setup for most players is to use the highest quality flak vest available and combine it with a duster made out of the best sharp protection material available. If you have the royalty DLC, the cape is practically identical to the duster. The best material is going to be either Thrumbo fur or hyperweave, but Devil Strand offers a very robust and economical option that also adds in extra protection against fire. Alternatively, you might consider leather from Megasloth, Rhinoceros, Elephant, Bear, or Wolf. Always prioritize your higher quality materials on the duster, and then after that, a button-down shirt to add extra protection to the torso. I did say skip the flak jacket, but if you can't get your hands on a decent duster, you can always opt to fill in with a flak jacket. With this combo, the flak vest will provide 100% sharp protection, 36% blunt, and 27% heat. This applies to the torso, neck, and shoulders. This jumps all the way to 180% sharp, 64% blunt, and 48% heat at legendary quality. If you include a Devil Strand duster on the outside, that's an additional 42% sharp, 10% blunt, and 90% heat protection. Experiment with the different textiles so that you can see the various levels of protection for yourself. Remember, the flak vest does cause a slight movement speed penalty at 0.12 cells per second, but the effect is negligible when you use the vest without the pants or the jacket. The flak vest duster combo is strong enough that you could skip the rest of the armor and use this setup to beat the game on any difficulty, including 500% threat. Oftentimes it ends up just being easier to focus on putting the effort into pumping out masterwork in legendary flak vest and dusters, rather than trying to upgrade to higher tier armors. That being said, the rest of the armor in the game does have its value and can fit into your overall strategy. The next armor we're going to take a look at is Recon armor. Recon armor isn't the best armor in the game, but it still can have a place in your colony. It's great for your medical pawns or crafters that you don't intend to put into harm's way, but you still want them to have protection in case things go sideways. That way they have reasonable protection, but aren't losing movement speed from a flak vest or heavier marine armor. Recon armor provides 92% sharp, 40% blunt, and 46% heat protection at normal quality. This jumps to 165% sharp, 72% blunt, and 82% heat protection at legendary quality. Since Recon armor takes up the middle and outer layers, it can't be combined with other protective pieces. It covers the neck, torso, arms, and legs. Recon armor is still quite expensive to craft at 80 plasteel, 10 uranium, and 3 advanced components. I generally skip crafting these and stick with what I can scavenge from late game enemies. Locust armor is a type of Recon armor that is added via the royalty DLC. This is my preferred armor for my melee pawns, especially if they're sidecasters. It's a Recon armor with a jump pack built in. This allows a pawn to equip a utility item while still having the benefit of a jump pack. I prefer to combine this with a shield belt, allowing melee to jump into key areas while retaining the protection of a shield. A lot of players prefer a more protective armor for their melee, and then they use those melee pawns as meat shields, but given how easily even the tankiest pawns can die, I prefer a more mobile approach, which relies on the Locust armor. Next up is Marine armor. Marine armor is the most iconic armor in the game. It makes your pawns look like space marines, and, well, who doesn't love that? It takes up both the outer layer and the middle layer, meaning it cannot be combined with any other protective piece aside from a helmet. Just like all other types of power armor, it covers the torso, neck, arms, and legs. Having significantly more protection to the arms and legs is valuable to some players, but remember, the torso and neck are the critical places to protect, and we want as much protection there as we possibly can manage. I tend to prioritize flak vests over marine armor until I can start acquiring excellent quality marine armor or better. It's significantly easier to spam craft flak vests when compared to marine armor, meaning you can produce high quality flak vests for all your pawns long before you are able to produce marine armor that can compete. When comparing an excellent flak vest to an excellent set of marine armor, or masterwork to masterwork, the marine armor is going to beat the flak vest. At normal quality, marine armor provides protection of 106% sharp, 45% blunt, and 54% heat. This jumps to 190% sharp, 81% blunt, and 97% heat at legendary quality. Marine armor causes a movement speed slow of 0.4 cells per second, but the truth is you're probably not going to notice this, unless they have a rollout site of combat that relies heavily on movement speed. As I previously mentioned regarding Recon armor, I tend to value movement speed on my doctors, given that they need to get to the patient as soon as possible. On top of the movement speed penalty, it's also pretty expensive to craft. It costs 100 plasteel, 20 uranium, and 4 advanced components. This does make it significantly more expensive than the previously discussed flak vest and duster combo. Grenadier armor is a type of marine armor that comes from the royalty DLC. This set of armor is essentially the same, but has a built-in grenade launcher. It has marginally worse protection, giving 5% less sharp and blunt than equal quality marine armor. I tend not to bother with these since you won't be finding them on enemies, but it can still be worthwhile to mix a couple of these into your strategy for added flexibility. The last of the main armor types we will cover is Cataphract armor. This one is also added via the royalty DLC. It requires 2 tech prints before you can even research the technology, so this is not something you can expect to be using every single run. You can think of this armor as powered up marine armor. It provides 120% sharp, 50% blunt, and 60% heat protection at normal quality. This goes all the way up to 200% sharp, 90% blunt, and 108% heat protection at legendary quality. If you do manage to get a legendary set of Cataphract armor, then there will be no weapon in the game that can deal full damage to your pawn. They can still take damage, but it will always be mitigated. It is rather expensive to craft, but after you've gone through all the work of gathering the tech prints and researching this late game armor, you probably have the resources to spare. It costs 150 plasteel, 50 uranium, and 6 advanced components. It has all the same coverage and fills the same layers as marine armor. All that being said, it does reduce movement speed by 0.8 cells per second, which is the same penalty as plate armor. By the time you're crafting Cataphract armor, there isn't much reason to use any armor prior to this tech. While there may be a reason to use Flak Vest Duster combo over marine armor, there's not much of a reason to use it over Cataphract armor. Phoenix armor is a type of Cataphract armor. If you have access to Cataphract armor, then you automatically unlock access to Phoenix armor. Given the fact that Phoenix armor reduces a pawn's flammability down to 2%, it can be rather valuable if you can get your hands on a set, and this alone makes it worth using over Cataphract, even if you do lose a small amount of sharp and blunt protection. It also has a built-in flamethrower and provides substantial heat protection. The last thing we're going to address in this video are the armor implants. If you have the royalty DLC, then you gain access to the armor implant technology. Much like many of the royalty techs, you will need to find the imprint before you can unlock the technology. There are 3 types of armor implants: Tough Skin Gland, Armor Skin Gland, and Stone Skin Gland. They protect every single part of your pawn, including eyes, fingers, and toes. The Tough Skin Gland has 35% sharp, 10% blunt, and 30% heat protection, but it does come at the cost of reducing a pawn's movement speed to 95% of its initial value. The Armor Skin Gland has 52% sharp, 20% blunt, and 40% heat protection, while reducing a pawn's movement speed to 90%. It also reduces a pawn's beauty by 1. The Stone Skin Gland is the most powerful of the 3, with 70% sharp, 30% blunt, and 50% heat protection. This last one reduces the pawn's movement speed to 85% of its initial value. It also reduces the pawn's beauty by 2. I tend to prefer putting these on my melee, given that they're more likely to take damage, and movement speed becomes less useful in your melee compared to your other pawns. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope you found some of this information useful. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit the like button. Leave a comment below to let me know what kind of video you'd like to see next.